Continuing our exploration of the pivotal figures in modern history, we now focus on one of the most multifaceted and controversial scientists of the 20th century, Julius Robert Oppenheimer, frequently known as the father of the atomic bomb. Yet, before he became an emblem of power, tragedy, and ethical struggle, Oppenheimer was simply a remarkably bright and inquisitive young man seeking to decipher the mysteries of the universe. This initial segment delves into his formative years, his intellectual awakening, and the journey that ultimately placed him at the heart of humanity's most potent scientific endeavor. Before we dive into the main content, please consider subscribing to my channel, giving a thumbs up, leaving a comment, and sharing this video to support my efforts in bringing you more fascinating content. Your support is greatly appreciated. A privileged upbringing, yet a perpetual outsider, Robert Oppenheimer was born on April 22, 1904, in New York City, into a prosperous Jewish family of German heritage. His father, Julius Oppenheimer, was a successful textile importer, while his mother, Ella Friedman, was a gifted painter. Their home on Riverside Drive was a haven for books, art, music, and stimulating intellectual discussions. Despite being raised in comfort and affluence, young Robert felt like an outsider looking in. He was reserved, introspective, physically delicate, and displayed a greater interest in minerals, literature, or science than in the games and activities pursued by his peers. At the age of 12, he became a member of the New York Mineralogical Club, astonishingly delivering lectures to adults twice, or even 3 times his age. It was evident from an early age that he was no ordinary child. Oppenheimer's early education, a universe unfolding. Oppenheimer attended the Ethical Culture School in New York, a forward-thinking institution that placed a strong emphasis on ethics, responsibility, and social consciousness. It was within these walls that he began to develop a worldview that harmonized scientific inquiry with profound philosophical insight. While his classmates concentrated on their assigned work, Robert devoted his nights to reading Shakespeare, Baudelaire, ancient philosophical texts, and advanced mathematics books, all driven by his own volition. Teachers characterized him as possessing a mind that burns with intensity. He graduated at the top of his class and entered Harvard University in 1922. There, he pursued a broad range of subjects: chemistry, French literature, philosophy, physics, and poetry, completing his undergraduate studies in an impressive 3 years. Oppenheimer's thirst for knowledge appeared insatiable. A crisis at Cambridge, the breaking point of a young genius. Following his time at Harvard, Robert journeyed to England to study experimental physics at the University of Cambridge, working at the Cavendish Laboratory under the guidance of J.J. Thomson, the discoverer of the electron. However, Oppenheimer encountered significant challenges. He excelled in theoretical concepts, but struggled with the practical aspects of experimentation. Equipment seemed to break at his touch. His frustration mounted. He felt inadequate, isolated, and mentally unstable. His depression intensified into what modern psychologists might diagnose as a breakdown. In one notorious incident, he left an apple laced with toxic chemicals on the desk of his tutor, Patrick Blackett, potentially as an act of anger, or perhaps as a desperate plea for assistance. The incident was quietly suppressed, and Oppenheimer's parents intervened to avert a larger crisis. Unable to cope with laboratory work, he transitioned toward theoretical physics, the realm where his intellectual gifts truly shone. Finding himself in Göttingen, the birth of a theorist. In 1926, Oppenheimer relocated to the University of Göttingen in Germany, a leading global hub for quantum mechanics. There, he studied under Max Born and engaged with some of the towering figures of early quantum theory, including Werner Heisenberg, Wolfgang Pauli, Pascual Jordan, Paul Dirac, and Enrico Fermi. Göttingen was a hotbed of groundbreaking ideas. Quantum mechanics was being developed in real time. Oppenheimer thrived in this dynamic environment. At the young age of 23, he earned a PhD in just over a year, publishing significant papers on quantum theory. His work garnered him respect among Europe's foremost physicists. This marked the true emergence of Oppenheimer as a scientist, returning to America, planting the seeds of a scientific empire. In the late 1920s, Oppenheimer returned to the United States with a clear vision to elevate American theoretical physics to a position of global leadership. He accepted dual appointments at the University of California, Berkeley and the California Institute of Technology. At Berkeley, he rapidly became the nucleus of a rising generation of American physicists. Students admired his intellect, but also feared his incisive criticism. He quoted Sanskrit and French poetry in class and seamlessly transitioned from discussions of particle physics to metaphysics in a single conversation. He worked on pioneering topics, including quantum tunneling, the theory of electrons and positrons, cosmic rays, and astrophysics, including early predictions related to black holes. Oppenheimer's brilliance was beyond dispute. However, he remained emotionally detached, enigmatic, and often troubled, a man of contradictions. Even in his early years, Oppenheimer was a paradox. Painfully shy, yet magnetically captivating. Brilliant, yet insecure. Idealistic, yet prone to self-destructive thoughts. Deeply intellectual, yet emotionally fragile. Those who knew him well said he harbored storms within. But something profound was taking shape within Oppenheimer, a blend of idealism, curiosity, ambition, and existential angst. It was this unique combination that ultimately led him to accept a leadership role that would define and haunt his life, the Manhattan Project. As we continue the story of Robert Oppenheimer, we now enter the turbulent 1930s, a decade that transformed him from a brilliant academic into a pivotal figure in the most secretive scientific undertaking in human history. Section 2 will explore his political engagement, his recruitment into wartime research, and the establishment of Los Alamos, the birthplace of the atomic bomb, a rising star in American physics. By the early 1930s, Oppenheimer had become recognized as one of the most promising theoretical physicists in the United States. At Berkeley, he cultivated a vibrant research group that tackled cutting-edge subjects in quantum mechanics, nuclear physics, and astrophysics. He was an inspiration to his students. Brilliant, intense, and unpredictable. He was a chain smoker, rarely slept, and often graded papers with one hand while reading Sanskrit poetry with the other. His academic reputation continued to soar, and he became a central figure in the new wave of American scientists. But beyond the confines of the classroom, the world was undergoing dramatic changes, political curiosity, and dangerous associations. The Great Depression struck America with devastating force. Millions were unemployed, and political movements gained traction on both ends of the ideological spectrum. Oppenheimer, deeply empathetic to human suffering, developed sympathies for left-wing causes. He made financial contributions to support Spanish Republicans fighting against fascism, labor unions, and student political organizations. Several of his friends, and even the woman he loved, Jean Tatlock, were members of the American Communist Party. However, Oppenheimer himself never formally joined the party. He was too independent and too wary of rigid ideologies. Nevertheless, the FBI opened a file on him. His name appeared in surveillance reports. These associations would later return to haunt him. The world approaches war. By the late 1930s, concerns about German scientific advancements were growing. Physicists across the globe understood that nuclear fission, discovered in 1938, held the potential to unlock a weapon of unimaginable destructive power. In early 1941, Oppenheimer participated in clandestine meetings where scientists deliberated on the feasibility of creating an atomic bomb. It was during these discussions that Oppenheimer first grasped that his knowledge might be required not for pure research, but for the purposes of war. Recruitment. The military comes knocking. General Leslie Groves, the resolute and demanding leader of the newly established Manhattan Project, approached Oppenheimer in 1942. Groves sought someone who possessed a deep understanding of the underlying science, the ability to manage brilliant and often difficult personalities, the capacity to maintain secrecy, and the agility to work swiftly under pressure. Most scientists were averse to bureaucracy. However, Groves immediately recognized something exceptional in Oppenheimer, a leader disguised as an academic. Despite reservations regarding Oppenheimer's political background, Groves selected him to direct the central laboratory of the atomic bomb project. It was an audacious decision. Oppenheimer had never overseen a major project, let alone a top-secret military program. Yet Groves possessed an instinct. Oppie, as his colleagues called him, could inspire people, and had the intellectual breadth to envision the project in its entirety. Birth of Los Alamos, the secret city. Oppenheimer proposed establishing a research laboratory in a remote region of New Mexico, where scientists could operate in complete secrecy. He suggested the mesa of Los Alamos, near the site of the old ranch school where he had once enjoyed riding horses. Groves immediately approved the proposal. Construction commenced in late 1942. Oppenheimer relocated his family to the high desert and assumed responsibility for building not just a laboratory but an entire community, including housing for scientists and soldiers, workshops, dormitories, dining halls, classrooms, supply depots, and security checkpoints. Oppenheimer was omnipresent, inspecting equipment, planning experiments, arranging transportation, recruiting staff, and even attending to the needs of school teachers for the scientists' children. Scientists later described Los Alamos as a city of contradictions, isolated yet crowded, secretive yet brimming with ideas, military-controlled yet populated by rebels and eccentric geniuses. Oppenheimer was the glue that held it all together, a leader unlike any other. At Los Alamos, Oppenheimer surprised military officials with his unconventional approach. He eschewed strict formality. He encouraged open discussion, collaboration, and creative thinking. He treated Nobel laureates and young students alike as partners. He radiated energy. He moved rapidly from building to building, his coat billowing in the wind, pockets overflow with notes and unfinished calculations. One colleague described him, "Oppenheimer made you feel that your work mattered to the fate of the world." He united hundreds of scientists from diverse backgrounds and forged them into a cohesive and effective team. The immense pressure of the Manhattan Project. But the burden on Oppenheimer's shoulders was immense. He knew that Nazi Germany was pursuing similar research, that the outcome of the war might hinge on their success, and that failure could spell disaster for the Allies. Scientists worked tirelessly day and night. Some slept in their laboratories. Others barely saw their families. Oppenheimer pushed himself harder than anyone else. He became thin, pale, and nervous, but remained intensely focused. He juggled quantum mechanics with logistics, budgets, morale, politics, and military deadlines. Scientific challenges, the puzzle of the bomb. Creating an atomic weapon demanded solving unprecedented scientific challenges. How to purify uranium-235. How to produce plutonium. Could a chain reaction be controlled? Would the bomb detonate prematurely? Could it even explode at all? At every stage, Oppenheimer coordinated teams. The theoretical division, experimental groups, metallurgy labs, chemistry units, explosive engineers, and implosion specialists. He possessed sufficient understanding of each problem to guide solutions, even when the specifics lay outside his own area of expertise. His leadership transformed the chaotic assortment of theories and calculations into a functional weapon. Moral tension, the scientist's burden. Despite his intense focus, Oppenheimer grappled with feelings of guilt. He recognized that they were creating something that would change the world and potentially destroy it. However, he also believed that the bomb could swiftly bring the war to an end and save millions of lives. His famous words later captured this internal conflict. "I did my job. I did what I had to do." Yet the moral implications haunted him long before the bomb was completed. The Trinity test approaches. By mid-1945, after years of relentless effort, the world's first nuclear device was nearing completion. A test was scheduled in the New Mexico desert. The code name, Trinity. Oppenheimer knew the moment was fast approaching, the moment that would divide history into before and after. As we continue the story of Robert Oppenheimer, we now arrive at the most dramatic and consequential moment in his life, the creation, testing, and first use of the atomic bomb. Section 3 explores the Trinity test, the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the emotional turmoil that followed. This is a chapter where Oppenheimer transitioned from a brilliant scientist into a symbol of humanity's power and its peril. The final preparations, a weapon no one had ever seen before. By mid-1945, the Los Alamos scientists had been working around the clock for nearly 3 years. They were exhausted, underweight, anxious, and terrified of failure. The bomb they developed, nicknamed the Gadget, was based on plutonium implosion, a method far more complex than anyone had initially imagined. Every step involved novel physics. Every calculation had to be perfect. If one wire, one explosive lens, One timing switch failed. The device would fizzle into embarrassment. On July 15, 1945, the weapon was transported in pieces to the Trinity test site in the New Mexico desert. Oppenheimer arrived with dark circles under his eyes, chain smoking as he oversaw the final assembly. Scientists whispered, "If it works, history changes. If it fails, we go back to the drawing board and maybe lose the war." The night before Trinity. Tension in the desert. The night was stormy. Lightning flashed above the test tower. Winds howled across the desert. Some feared the test would be delayed. Others feared it would ignite the entire atmosphere, a theoretical possibility scientists had once discussed. Oppenheimer walked silently among the equipment. No one knew what he was thinking. One physicist later said, "We saw Oppie that night, and he looked like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders." Trinity, the birth of the atomic age. At 5:29 a.m. on July 16, 1945, the countdown reached zero. A flash brighter than the sun erupted across the desert. Clouds split open. The sand beneath the tower turned into green glass. A mushroom cloud rose into the sky, glowing in fiery orange, purple, and white. The shock wave hit the observer seconds later, a violent punch of wind and sound. The world had changed forever. In that moment, words from the ancient Sanskrit text Bhagavad Gita came into Oppenheimer's mind. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." He whispered the sentence quietly, almost to himself. It became one of the most haunting quotes in history. Reactions: triumph, terror, disbelief. The scientists reacted in different ways. Some cheered, some cried, some stood in stunned silence, and a few felt sick. For Oppenheimer, the emotions were mixed. Relief that the bomb had worked, pride in the scientific achievement, and dread about what would come next. General Groves, feeling triumphant, said, "The war will end because of this." But Oppenheimer looked at the burning sky and replied softly, "I suppose we all thought that one way or another." A decision in Washington, how the bomb would be used. Less than a month later, the United States faced a strategic choice. Japan refused unconditional surrender. American military leaders believed an invasion could cost millions of lives. President Harry Truman approved the use of the atomic bomb to force Japan to surrender. Oppenheimer was not part of the political decision-making process. He could only watch as the weapon he helped create was prepared for combat. Hiroshima, August 6, 1945. At 8:15 a.m., the uranium-bombed little boy detonated over Hiroshima. A blinding flash, a wave of heat, a rising pillar of smoke. Nearly 70,000 people died instantly. Tens of thousands more suffered burns and radiation sickness. News reached Los Alamos in Washington. Celebrations erupted in some places. But Oppenheimer went pale when he heard the casualty numbers. He said nothing for a long time. Nagasaki, August 9, 1945. 3 days later, a second bomb, Fat Man, struck Nagasaki. Another city destroyed. Another wave of death and suffering. The moral shock spread among the scientists. Some felt pride. Some felt horror. Some felt both. Oppenheimer was tormented. A colleague recalled, "Oppie looked like a man who had lost his soul." The war ends, victory and guilt. On August 15th, Japan announced its surrender. World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history, was over. Oppenheimer was celebrated in newspapers as a hero. He met with President Truman. He was praised as a man who shortened the war. But inside, he felt no triumph. During the meeting in the Oval Office, Oppenheimer told Truman, "I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman, angered, later told aides, "Don't ever bring that crybaby into my office again." This moment marked the beginning of a long fall from grace. Aftermath, a man divided. The bomb had ended the war, but it unleashed a new era of fear. Countries raced to develop nuclear weapons. The Cold War began, and Oppenheimer, once the scientific leader of the Manhattan Project, now found himself questioning everything. The decision to use the bomb, the future of nuclear science, the ethical responsibility of physicists, and his own role in the destruction of two cities. He became a public figure, celebrated but internally shattered. His haunting Gita quote reflected what he felt. We knew the world would not be the same. A silent transformation. After 1945, Oppenheimer changed. He became more philosophical, more political, more outspoken about the dangers of nuclear arms, more concerned with humanity's future, and more willing to question the government he had once served. The seeds of his later downfall, suspicion, political conflict, and the stripping of a security clearance were already beginning to grow. As we continue the story of Robert Oppenheimer, we now enter the most tragic and politically charged chapter of his life. If Section 3 showed the birth of the atomic age, Section 4 reveals the cost Oppenheimer paid for creating it. These are the years when he transformed from a national hero into a political target. A man admired by scientists but distrusted by powerful leaders. After the war, Oppenheimer as America's scientific hero. When World War II ended, Oppenheimer was one of the most famous scientists on Earth. Newspapers called him the American Prometheus, the man who stole fire from the gods. He became the director of the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, a prestigious position that placed him among the greatest minds of the century, including Albert Einstein, Kurt Gödel, John von Neumann, and Freeman Dyson. For a brief moment, he seemed untouchable. But history had other plans. The nuclear future, hope and fear intertwined. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Oppenheimer hoped the world would embrace international cooperation and control nuclear weapons. He believed atomic science should be placed under global authority, not national militaries. He pushed for diplomatic transparency, collaboration between nations, limiting nuclear testing and preventing a future arms race. But the Cold War was beginning. Fear and suspicion replaced dialogue. Many in the U.S. government saw Oppenheimer's ideas as unrealistic or worse, dangerous. The hydrogen bomb, a weapon far more powerful. In 1949, the Soviet Union successfully tested its first atomic bomb. The American government panicked, believing the U.S. was losing nuclear superiority. A new proposal emerged. The hydrogen bomb, or H-bomb, a device 1,000 times more powerful than the bombs dropped on Japan. Oppenheimer opposed the idea, not because it was impossible, but because it was morally monstrous. He argued the weapon had no military purpose. It would kill civilians on a scale beyond comprehension, and it would push the world toward mutual annihilation. He said, a super bomb is a weapon of genocide. But his stance angered officials, especially those who saw nuclear dominance as essential to American power. Enemies in high places, the rise of Louis Strauss. Among Oppenheimer's political adversaries was Louis Strauss, a wealthy businessman and influential figure in the Atomic Energy Commission, AEC. Strauss resented Oppenheimer for several reasons. Oppenheimer publicly dismissed Strauss's scientific ideas. He opposed Strauss's policies. He had more influence over scientists and the public, and he embarrassed Strauss during congressional testimony. Strauss was not a man who forgave humiliation. When the chance came to undermine Oppenheimer, he seized it. The climate of fear, McCarthyism spreads. By the early 1950s, America was consumed by anti-communist hysteria. Senator Joseph McCarthy led nationwide investigations, accusing academics, artists, and officials of communist sympathies. Old associations became weapons. Oppenheimer's past, his donations to left-wing causes, his friendships with communists, his relationship with Jean Tatlock, all resurfaced. The FBI intensified its surveillance. His phones were tapped. His mail opened. His colleagues questioned. Strauss and others convinced Washington that Oppenheimer was a security risk. The 1954 security hearing, a modern inquisition. In April 1954, the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission summoned Oppenheimer to a secret security hearing. It would become one of the most shameful political trials in American history. The panel was biased in the beginning. Much of the evidence came from FBI wiretaps. Witnesses were pressured. Context was ignored. Oppenheimer was interrogated for 27 hours over 4 weeks. They asked about his past political associations, his friendship with communists, his opposition to the H-bomb, his personal relationships, and his leadership decisions during the war. He stood alone, without legal power, without allies in government. Einstein advised him not to attend the hearing. He said, "This is not about justice. It is about power." But Oppenheimer believed the truth would save him. It did not. A character assassination, the fall of a national hero. The hearing turned into a devastating attack on Oppenheimer's reputation. Old mistakes were exaggerated. Rumors were treated as facts. His patriotism was questioned. His morals were dissected. His political beliefs were painted as threats. Oppenheimer, exhausted and humiliated, began to crumble. One witness said, "He looked like a man being slowly broken." In June 1954, the AEC voted 2-1 to revoke his security clearance. The verdict: he was loyal, but a risk to national security. In truth, he was punished for opposing the hydrogen bomb, challenging powerful men, thinking too independently, and being unafraid to criticize the government. The decision destroyed his political influence and ended his role in shaping U.S. nuclear policy. After the hearing, a ghost of his former self. Following the trial, Oppenheimer returned to Princeton. He continued teaching and lecturing, but something inside him had changed. He became quieter, more withdrawn. Haunted, he once said, "They have taken my honor, and the country I serve does not want me." He avoided public political battles. Instead, he focused on philosophy, science, and small seminars with students. But the brilliance remained. Even his critics admitted that no one could replace his insight and leadership. A public ruined, a legacy unresolved. The United States had destroyed one of its greatest scientific minds at the height of the Cold War. For years afterward, Oppenheimer walked like a man carrying invisible chains. Yet around the world, scientists admired him. They understood the truth. Oppenheimer had been punished not for crime, but for conscience. As we enter the final chapter of Robert Oppenheimer's life, we now follow the aftermath of his political destruction, a period of quiet reflection, intellectual rebirth, partial redemption, and finally, a peaceful death. If the previous section showed how America turned against a mind that helped win a war, Section 5 reveals how time, memory, and conscience reshaped Oppenheimer's legacy. A wounded man, but not a broken mind. After the 1954 hearing stripped him of his security clearance, Oppenheimer returned to the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. Although publicly humiliated, his intellectual spirit was still alive. He continued to teach, write essays on science and philosophy, and engage in deep discussions with students. He preferred small seminars rather than large lectures, intimate circles where ideas flowed freely. Colleagues later recalled, Oppenheimer spoke softly, but every word seemed heavier after 1954. He no longer tried to influence national policy, but his mind remained razor sharp, filled with insights about physics, culture, literature, and the human condition. A new focus, philosophy, poetry, and the meaning of science. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, Oppenheimer shifted from technical physics to broader questions. What is the responsibility of scientists? How should society wield powerful technology? Can knowledge exist without morality? What is the true nature of truth in science? He referenced Greek tragedies, the Bhagavad Gita, Dante, Shakespeare, and quantum theory, connecting science with the arts and humanities. His speeches became masterpieces of reflection, blending wisdom and regret. One of his most famous lines from this period: "When you see something that is technically sweet, you go ahead and do it. You stop when you see what it costs." These words captured his internal conflict, the tension between curiosity and conscience, the slow return of respect. Ironically, as political hostility faded, the scientific world grew more sympathetic to Oppenheimer. Einstein supported him until the end of his life. Niels Bohr, Pauli, Bethe, and other luminaries of physics stood publicly in his defense. He received invitations from international organizations to speak at conferences, and universities bestowed upon him awards and honorary degrees. Slowly but surely, the reputation that had been tarnished by political machinations began its ascent back to prominence. Then, in 1963, an extraordinary event occurred. President John F. Kennedy approved awarding Oppenheimer the Enrico Fermi Award, one of the nation's highest scientific honors, a symbolic act of redemption. This was a subtle yet significant way for the U.S. government to tacitly acknowledge its past wrongs, to recognize the injustice Oppenheimer had endured. Tragically, Kennedy's assassination preceded the award ceremony. His successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, presented the award in December 1963. As Oppenheimer walked onto the stage to accept it, tears flowed freely among many of the scientists in the audience, a testament to their respect and sympathy. He offered no triumphant smile, only a bowed head and the words, "I accept this award with gratitude and with humility." It wasn't a complete restoration of all that he'd lost, but it was undoubtedly a new beginning. The final years, quiet on island. In the early 1960s, Oppenheimer increasingly sought solace at his home on St. John in the U.S. Virgin Islands, a tranquil haven he deeply cherished. There, he found peace in sailing, reading poetry, writing essays, and entertaining a close circle of friends and former students. Those who visited him described him as gentle, contemplative, humorous in a melancholic way, and still possessing his brilliance, but now with a newfound sense of peace. He relished long walks along the beach, often engaging in discussions about philosophy or quantum mechanics with anyone who happened to be visiting. Declining health, a battle he could not win. In 1965, after a lifetime habit of smoking, Oppenheimer received a diagnosis of throat cancer. He underwent surgery, radiation therapy, and other treatments, all which left him frail and visibly weakened. His voice, once sharp, elegant, and imbued with poetic cadence, faded to a mere whisper. Despite his declining health, he persisted in his work, writing his final essays, and continuing to meet with friends. He faced his illness with a remarkable calm, and it was said that he approached death with the same philosophical detachment that had once defined his approach to physics. The final moment. On February 18, 1967, surrounded by his wife Kitty and his children, Robert Oppenheimer passed away at his home in Princeton at the age of 62. There were no explosions, no applause, no political pronouncements. Just a quiet end to a life marked by turbulence and profound intellectual engagement. His ashes were scattered near the island he so dearly loved. The legacy he left behind. Oppenheimer's impact on the world extends far beyond the creation of the atomic bomb. He bequeathed to posterity. Scientific legacy. His major contributions to quantum mechanics, foundational work on neutron stars and black holes, his role in building the culture of theoretical physics in America, and his mentorship of generations of brilliant scientists. Ethical legacy. More than any other scientist of his time, Oppenheimer embodied the moral quandary of modern science. Can knowledge be divorced from responsibility? His life became a cautionary tale about the potential consequences of scientific power devoid of moral compass. Political legacy. His downfall during the Red Scare became a potent symbol of political persecution and the dangers of McCarthyism. In 2022, the U.S. government formally overturned the 1954 verdict, thereby restoring his honor and acknowledging the injustice he suffered. Cultural legacy. Books, plays, documentaries, and films, including Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, continue to grapple with the complexities of his paradoxical life. He had become a modern myth, the scientist who unlocked the power of the universe but paid a heavy price in his own soul. The duality of Oppenheimer, the final reflection. To many, he remains both, the father of the atomic bomb and the prophet who warned against its use. Both identities are inextricably linked to his persona. Both define him. In one of his final interviews, Oppenheimer reflected, "I have been a man who saw history's shadow fall upon him, and could not step aside. Today, his life serves as a mirror reflecting the challenges of our own era, reminding us that science is a potent force. Technology must be guided by wisdom and ethical considerations, and no discovery is ever truly free from its moral ramifications." Robert Oppenheimer is gone, but the fundamental questions he raised concerning power, responsibility, and the future trajectory of humanity continue to resonate and shape our world.